The moment Calla Marchetti pressed her ear against the cold mahogany door of the executive lounge, she knew her life was about to fracture down the middle. She hadn't meant to listen. She'd come up to the 42nd floor of the Veltrano Tower at 9:30 to leave the Ostraco contracts on the small table outside his private lounge. 3 years as his secretary had taught her two rules. Never enter that lounge unless invited, and never repeat what you accidentally heard through its walls. Tonight, both rules were about to die. Through the narrow gap where the door hadn't quite latched, she heard him laughing. Rocco Veltrano did not laugh. Not really. Not the man whose signature could collapse a port authority, freeze a senator's campaign, or quietly remove a rival from this earth without a single shell casing left behind. He smiled sometimes the way a knife smiles when it catches light. But laughter was something Calla had never heard from him in 3 years. Yet there it was, low, amused, cruel in a way that sounded almost playful. "You're insane, Salvatore," another voice said. Calla recognized it instantly. Bruno Falcone, the consigliere, the man who whispered into Rocco's ear before every major decision. "You're actually going to do it?" "Why not?" That was Salvatore Renzi, Rocco's oldest friend, a man who'd built his shipping empire on bones nobody asked questions about. Look at her. The girl's been there 3 years. Files everything alphabetically. Brings him coffee at exactly 7:45 every morning. She's basically furniture. "She's polite furniture," a fourth voice added. "I'll give her that." "That's the entire point." Salvatore's voice rose. "Rocco, listen. The Ostraco dinner is in 11 days. Every family at that table is going to bring someone gorgeous, polished, and weaponized. You walk in with your secretary, the mousy one, the girl nobody at that table has ever even noticed." A pause. Then Rocco's voice, dry as bone. "And what does that accomplish?" "It tells every man in that room that you don't need to perform anymore. You're so far above the game, you can bring a secretary to the most exclusive dinner on the Eastern Seaboard and dare anyone to say a word about it. It also," Bruno added carefully, "humiliates Donatella Vischetti in a way she will never recover from." Calla's breath caught. Donatella Vischetti, the woman who'd cornered her in the elevator 3 months ago and asked, in that perfumed voice, whether Rocco had ever considered that his secretary's collar was crooked. "Now that," Salvatore said, "is a bonus." 50,000, the fourth voice said. 50,000 says she breaks before dessert. 25 says she doesn't even make it through the appetizer, Bruno said. "You're all children," Rocco said. But Calla had stood outside that door long enough to know exactly what his voice sounded like when he was about to agree to something. A heavy silence, the clink of crystal. "Fine," Rocco said. "I'll bring her. It'll be entertaining." The men laughed. Calla did not move. She stood in that hallway for what might have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes, her hand still pressed to the manila folder against her chest, her heartbeat steady in a way that surprised her. She did not cry. She did not shake. She did not feel the things a woman in her position was supposed to feel. What she felt instead was something colder, sharper. A thing she had buried so deep. For so long, she had almost convinced herself it had died down there. It hadn't. She walked back to her desk, set the folder down, opened the bottom drawer where she kept her purse and her spare cardigan and one other item she had not touched in 3 years. A small black velvet pouch, weightier than it looked. She laid her fingers on it for a moment. Then she closed the drawer. They have no idea, she thought, who they just invited. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner, what made an entire room of the most dangerous people in the country stop breathing at the same instant, do me a small favor. Drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far Calla's story is going to travel tonight. And if you make it to the end of this video, you'll understand why this single dinner rewrote the lives of every person in that room. Hit that like button. Let's begin. The Veltrano Tower rose 48 stories above the river, and from the outside, it looked like every other glass cathedral built by men who had more money than conscience. But Calla had learned, in 3 years, that the building had a heartbeat. And tonight, that heartbeat had just changed rhythm. She was 11 days away from a dinner she had not been invited to. She intended to be ready. For 3 years, Calla Marchetti had been the most invisible woman on the 42nd floor. She arrived at 6:50 every morning, coat on the third hook, bag in the lower left drawer, coffee from the third-floor cafe, black, no sugar, the way Mr. Veltrano had told her once, 3 years ago, and never repeated. She had memorized his preferences the way a cartographer memorizes a coastline. The angle he liked his blinds, the seat he preferred at the conference table, the 2 assistants whose calls he would always take, and the 7 whose calls he would never return. She knew which contracts had hidden riders and which lawyers were padding hours. She corrected the Italian in his outgoing letters because his great-grandfather had been from Bari, and the dialect mattered to him, even if he pretended it didn't. She had once, in her 2nd month, quietly redirected a courier carrying a package to the wrong floor, sparing a man she did not know from a meeting he was not meant to survive. Mr. Veltrano had never learned about it. She preferred it that way. The other staff orbited around her without ever truly seeing her. The associates called her the quiet one. The cleaning crew called her Signorina Cardigan because she wore a soft gray one over her blouse no matter the weather. The senior partners did not call her anything at all. To them, she was a piece of office equipment that occasionally smiled. She liked it that way. Invisibility was a kind of armor. And Calla Marchetti had spent the last 6 years of her life learning, in the most expensive way possible, that safety was not something she could take for granted. She was 27 years old. She lived alone in a small 2-room apartment in the Lindenwall district. She kept 3 plants alive on the windowsill and a single framed photograph face down in a drawer. She read voraciously, mostly history and old Italian poetry. She did not date. She did not drink. She did not go anywhere where someone might recognize her face. The only luxury she allowed herself was a single hour every Sunday at a small chapel on Fenmark Street, where she lit a candle and said nothing to no one. This was the woman who walked back to her desk that night with the laughter of 4 powerful men still ringing in her ears. She finished her shift the way she always did. She straightened her keyboard. She returned 3 pens to the cup. She powered down her monitor. She nodded politely at the night security guard, Octavian, a kind older man who always asked about her weekend even when she had nothing to tell him. She rode the elevator down 42 stories without looking at her reflection in the brass doors. And when she stepped out into the cold air of the plaza, she did not turn left toward the train station, the way she always did. She turned right. She walked 4 blocks east, past the closed flower shops and the late-night pharmacy, until she came to the small, locked storage facility where she kept the only things in this world she could not allow anyone to find. She unlocked the door. She stepped inside. And for the first time in 3 years, Calla Marchetti looked at her old life and did not flinch. He called her into his office at 10:14 the next morning. She knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock since 7, waiting. She had washed her face twice, pressed her blouse, and fastened the small silver pin her grandmother had given her at the collar. She had even done something she had not done in 3 years. She had worn the dark red lipstick. It was subtle, not a statement. Just a quiet shade darker than usual. None of the men on the floor would notice, but Rocco Veltrano noticed everything, even the things he pretended not to. When she walked into his office, he was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the river. His tie was already loosened, which meant he had been on a difficult call. The Ostraco file lay open on his desk. "Miss Marchetti." he said, without turning. Sit, please. She sat. He turned. She saw the moment he registered the lipstick. A flicker, no more than a quarter second. But his eyes went to her mouth, and then back to her eyes, and something behind his expression recalibrated. I have a request, he said. An unusual one. Yes, sir. There is a dinner. 11 days from tonight. At the Aurelian Hotel. It is hosted by the Ostraco family in honor of a business arrangement that has taken 7 years to broker. Every guest of consequence on the eastern seaboard will be there. He paused. I would like you to attend with me. She kept her face perfectly still. May I ask in what capacity, sir? As my guest. He sat down on the edge of his desk. Not as a colleague, not as a member of staff. As my guest at a private dinner. I see. She let the silence stretch. She had learned, in 3 years, that Rocco Veltrano was a man who used silence the way other men used weapons. She had also learned that silence could be turned around on him. He shifted, slightly. You're not going to ask why. Would you tell me the truth if I did? The air in the room changed. She watched his face the way she had once watched her father's face across a dinner table when she was a child, looking for the flicker that told her whether the man in front of her was about to lie or about to be honest. I would tell you a version of the truth, he said carefully. That is the most I can offer. Then I'll save us both the time. She folded her hands in her lap. I'll go, Mr. Veltrano, on 3 conditions. His eyebrows lifted. 3. 3. Go on. First, you will not provide a stylist, a dress, or any of what I am sure your assistant has already started arranging. I will arrive at the Aurelian Hotel on my own, in my own clothing, by my own car. That's not how these dinners... That's the first condition. He studied her, the way a man reassesses a chess piece he had assumed was a pawn. Continue. Second, the Kaleva Foundation. The literacy and after-school program in the Mercer Hill district. They lost their funding in March. They will close in 6 weeks if no one steps in. I want you to fund them. 5 years. In full. Not as a tax shelter. Not as a charity gala showpiece. Quietly, anonymously, with no strings, no press, no plaque on the wall. How do you know about the Kaleva Foundation? That isn't part of the negotiation. A long beat passed. And the third condition? She held his gaze. She did not blink. That whatever happens at that dinner, whatever I do, whatever I say, whoever I speak to, you do not interfere. You do not protect me. You do not pull me out. Whatever happens in that room, I handle it. Alone. He stared at her for a long moment. Miss Marchetti, he said slowly, is there something I should know about you? She rose from her chair, smoothed her skirt, walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused. Yes, Mr. Veltrano, she said softly. There is. And she walked out, leaving him alone in his office with the file still open on his desk and the dark red mark of her lipstick on the rim of the coffee cup he had not noticed her place there an hour earlier. The storage facility on Brennan Row was the kind of place people used when they needed to forget something without throwing it away. Calla unlocked Unit 217 the night after the negotiation. She had not been inside in 2.5 years. The air smelled of dust and cedar and something faintly floral that her mind did not want to name. She closed the door behind her, set down her bag, and pulled the chain on the single overhead bulb. 3 boxes, a garment trunk, a leather case, brass-cornered, the kind they did not make anymore. And against the back wall, covered in a dust sheet, a tall, narrow shape she had not let herself look at since the funerals. She crossed to the leather case first. She knelt. She entered the combination from memory, 0411, her birthday. The lock clicked open the way it always had. Inside, nestled in green velvet, was a violin. not a beginner's instrument. A presenda from 1834, restored twice, last appraised at a sum that would have paid her rent for the rest of her life. Her grandfather had bought it for her when she was 11 years old, the night she played her first solo at the Conservatorio di Santa Margherita in Milan. He had cried. He had told her, in a voice rough with cigarette smoke and pride, that she had been born with music in her hands the way other children were born with eye color. Calla Marchetti had not always been a secretary on the 42nd floor of the Veltrano Tower. Calla Marchetti had once been Calla Dominici. She had been the youngest first-chair violinist in the history of the Sant'Eufemia Chamber Orchestra. She had played private recitals for cardinals and senators and one queen. At 21, she had been 3 months from her debut at La Scala when her father, Massimo Dominici, had been found in his study under circumstances no one was meant to question, beside a note that did not match his handwriting. Her father had been a banker, a respectable one, the kind of man who knew which families kept their money in which vaults, and which families did not want anyone knowing where their money was at all. 2 months after his death, her mother died of what the doctors called a complication of grief. Calla knew better. Her mother had not died of grief. Her mother had died of fear. Within 6 weeks, Calla had sold her name. Not legally. There had been no time and no one she could trust with the paperwork. She had simply walked away. She had taken her mother's maiden name, Marchetti. She had left Italy with 2 suitcases and the violin. She had crossed an ocean. She had stopped playing. She had stopped being seen. She had taken a job answering phones at a small accounting firm under the name Calla Marchetti. And from there she had moved to a mid-size legal office. And from there, 3 years ago, she had been hired by a corporate executive named Rocco Veltrano, whose business card said consulting but whose office smelled, faintly, of the same cologne her father's killers had left behind in his study. She had not taken the job by accident. She had taken it because the name Veltrano had appeared, once, in a ledger her father had hidden inside the lining of a chair he had asked her to look after the last time she saw him alive, and the name Ostraco had appeared on the same page. Calla sat on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit and lifted the violin out of its case. She did not play it. She only held it. She let her fingertips remember the weight, the grain, the small chip near the scroll, where she had once, at 14, dropped it during a thunderstorm and wept for an hour. 6 years. 6 years of cardigans and quiet smiles and answering phones and being furniture. And now, in 11 days, the men who had been on the page beside her father's name were all going to be in the same room. And Rocco Veltrano had just invited her in. She closed her eyes. "Papa," she thought, "I am so sorry it took me this long." She put the violin away. She locked the case. She turned out the light. Outside, the rain had started. She did not feel it. 11 days became 10. 10 became 7. 7 became 4. Calla did not change in any way that the men of the 42nd floor would have noticed. She arrived at 6:50. She left at 6. She brought the coffee. She filed the contracts. She wore the cardigan. But in the hours nobody watched, Calla Dominici was coming back to life. She started with her body. The violin had not been touched in 6 years, and her hands knew it. She practiced in the storage unit 2 hours every night, with the door locked and a thick blanket nailed over the small ventilation grate to muffle the sound. The first night, her fingers bled. By the 4th night, the calluses had begun to remember themselves. By the 7th night, the music had. She did not play anything new. She played the pieces her father had loved. The Tartini, the slow movement of the Bruch, the Bach Chaconne, which her grandfather had told her was a piece written by a man for the wife he had lost, and which no one should ever attempt to play before they had known a great loss. Calla had known a great loss. She played it anyway. She also began to read again, the way she had read at 21. Not novels. Files. The Veltrano Company maintained a closed archive on the 38th floor, and Calla, who had 3 years of accumulated trust and a key card that opened more doors than anyone realized, spent her lunch breaks down there with a small flashlight clenched between her teeth. She found 2 things. The first was a memorandum from the year her father had died, signed by a man named Aldo Ostraco, regarding what the document called the resolution of the Milan account. Her father's name was not in the memo, but the account number was. She had seen that number once, on a slip of paper inside the chair lining. The second was a list, 8 names. 5 of them were dead. 2 of them she did not know. The 8th was Rocco Veltrano. She sat in the dark archive for a long time. She did not feel rage the way she had expected to. She felt something quieter, a clarity, a sense of the room of her life, finally being lit. She paid a visit, on her 1/2 day off, to a woman named Liesel Hartwig, a former cultural attaché at the Italian embassy who had once written a glowing review of a young violinist's debut in Milan. Liesel was 71 now and lived above a bookshop on Crescent Lane. When Calla rang the bell, the old woman opened the door, looked at her for 1 full second, and said, without surprise, "Bambina, I wondered if you were still alive." They drank tea. They did not speak of the past directly. Liesel said only, "Whatever you are about to do it cleanly. Do not let them see you angry. Anger is the cheapest thing a Dominici woman can wear." Calla nodded. She did not ask how Liesel had known. She went back to the storage unit and opened the garment trunk for the first time since the night she had packed it. Inside, folded in tissue, was a dress her mother had worn exactly once, to a state dinner at the Quirinale Palace when Calla was 13. It was midnight black, floor length. The neckline was high, almost severe, with a single line of silver thread embroidered along the collarbone in a pattern Calla recognized as the family motto, in a script so small no one would read it unless they already knew it was there. Non si piega. We do not bend. The dress had been made by a tailor in Florence who was now dead. It would fit her. Her mother had been almost exactly her size. She brought it home. She hung it on her bedroom door. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her writing desk, took out the small black velvet pouch she had not opened in 3 years, and emptied its contents onto her kitchen table. A pair of earrings, sapphire, old cut, her grandmother's. She held one up to the light. "Hello," she whispered. "It's been a while." He came to her desk on the evening of the 9th day. It was nearly 7. The floor was empty. She had stayed late on purpose. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. Rocco Veltrano walked the way certain animals walked, in a way that told the room he had arrived without ever needing to be loud about it. "Miss Marchetti." "Mr. Veltrano." He stopped at the corner of her desk. He did not sit. He looked for a moment at the small framed photograph she had recently moved from the drawer to a place where she could see it during the day. The frame faced her, not him. He could not see the image, but he noted that it was new. "I have been thinking," he said, "about your 3 conditions." "Yes, sir. The first I do not understand. The second I have already arranged. The wire transfer to the Kaleva Foundation went through this morning, anonymously, structured through 3 different shell entities so no one will ever trace it back to me or to you. The board will receive notice tomorrow that they have a benefactor for the next 5 years." She did not let her face change, but something in her chest unlocked. "Thank you," she said. "The 3rd condition is the one I have been thinking about most." "And what have you concluded?" "That you are not what I have believed you to be." She set down her pen. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and went silent. "Sit down, Mr. Veltrano," she said quietly. He sat. He did not look surprised at the inversion of authority. He looked, if anything, relieved by it. 3 years ago, he said, I hired a young woman whose resume was unremarkable, polite, competent. The recruitment agency described her as steady. I needed someone steady. I did not need brilliance. I had brilliance everywhere. I needed a person who would do her work and ask nothing of me, and that is exactly what you have done. Yes. But, he paused. 2 months ago, I noticed something. I was on a call with a Sicilian client. The connection was poor. I was speaking in dialect, and he was misunderstanding me. You came in to set down a folder. You did not look at me. But when you walked out, you said, very quietly, in perfect Barese, try the verb in the conditional, signore. He will hear you better. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. She said nothing. There was another moment. 6 weeks ago, the Castellano file. There was a clause buried on page 43 that 3 of my lawyers missed. You corrected it before it left the building. You did not flag it to me. I found out 3 weeks later, by accident. It was a small clause. It would have cost me $11 million. She did not answer. He leaned forward. His voice dropped, not in volume, but in something rougher, more honest. Who are you, Miss Marchetti? She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her father sitting in his study with the light coming through the curtains, telling her once, when she was 9, that the only way to know who a man truly was to give him a piece of the truth and watch what he did with it. I will tell you part of it, she said, because I think you have earned a part of it, but not all of it. Not yet. Tell me what you can. I am not the person on my resume. I know. I have not been the person on my resume for 6 years. Before that, I was someone else. Someone with a different name and a different life and a future that ended on a Tuesday in November when my father was murdered in his own home. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. And you came to work for me, he said slowly, knowing what I am. Knowing what you are, and knowing something else. What? She held his gaze. That you are not the worst man in the room I am about to walk into. A long silence. Then he said very quietly, Miss Marchetti, I think I have made a mistake. Which one? I think I should not have agreed to bring you to that dinner. She smiled. It did not reach her eyes. It is too late, Mr. Veltrano, she said. I have already accepted. The Aurelian Hotel sat on the corner of Marchand Avenue and the river, its facade lit in soft amber, its driveway curved like the inside of a shell. By 8:15, the line of black cars had grown long enough to back up traffic for 2 blocks. Photographers had been kept behind a velvet rope at a respectful distance because the families attending the Ostraco dinner did not appear in photographs unless they had chosen to. Calla arrived at 8:32 in a car she had paid for herself. She had told Rocco she would arrive separately. She had not told him she would arrive late. She stepped out onto the curb in the black dress her mother had worn to the Quirinale, the sapphire earrings catching the amber light, her hair pinned in a low twist the way her grandmother had once taught her. A Dominici woman never wears her hair down in a room of men she does not trust. She did not carry a clutch. She did not carry a phone. She carried only a small ivory card, folded once in her left hand. The doorman, who had been trained to recognize every guest by sight, did not recognize her. He hesitated. Marchetti, she said quietly. I am with Mr. Veltrano. His expression flickered with confusion, the kind that suggested the guest he had been told to expect did not match the woman now standing in front of him. Of course, Signora, he said. Please. She walked into the lobby. The lobby of the Aurelian had been designed to make people feel small. Calla walked through it without slowing. She did not look at her reflection in any of the mirrored columns. She had stopped needing to. The dinner was being held in the Salon Belcourt on the second floor. She climbed the marble staircase rather than taking the elevator. She wanted to enter on her own feet. At the top of the stairs, two men in dark suits stood beside the entrance to the salon. One held a discreet earpiece. The other held a small leather-bound list. He looked up at her approach, prepared to ask for her name, and then his eyes went to her face, and he stopped. He stared. For a full second, his professional composure cracked. "Signora," he said in a voice that had gone slightly hoarse. "May I ask your name?" "Marchetti." She held out the small ivory card. "Guest of Mr. Veltrano." He took the card. He looked at it. He looked at her again. His eyes flickered down to a small silver pin she had fastened to the inside of her wrist, hidden by the cuff of her sleeve, except when she turned her hand a certain way. A pin shaped like a pomegranate, the symbol of a Milanese family that had not been spoken of openly in this city for 6 years. He did not say a word about the pin. He swallowed. He stepped aside. "Please," he said, "go in." She walked into the Salon Belcourt. The room held perhaps 40 people. The guests stood in clusters around the edges, drinks in hand, conversations low. Every face was a face that had been in the newspaper at least once. Heads began to turn, not all at once. The way heads turn in a room like that one, first the people closest to the door, then the next ring outward, like a stone dropped into still water. By the time Calla had taken 6 steps into the room, the volume of conversation had dropped by half. She did not stop. She did not slow. She walked, her hands at her sides, her chin level. She found him at the far side of the room, near the windows, in conversation with 2 men she recognized from the Veltrano files. He looked up. She watched him see her. She watched the precise moment Rocco Veltrano realized the woman who had brought him coffee at 7:45 every morning for 3 years had, in fact, never been the woman he had thought she was. Not for one single day. His glass stopped halfway to his lips. She crossed the room to him. She did not smile. She let the silence carry her. When she reached him, she said, very quietly, "Good evening, Mr. Veltrano." "Miss Marchetti," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "Shall we?" She offered him her arm. The room watched. He took it. And somewhere across the salon, near a tall window draped in cream silk, a silver-haired man with a deep scar along his jawline turned slowly to look at her. And the color drained from his face as if someone had opened a vein in his throat. His name was Aldo Ostraco. And he had just recognized the daughter of a man he had ordered removed 6 years ago. They were seated at the principal table. 12 chairs, 12 names. Calla had been placed to Rocco's right, which would have been a courtesy at any ordinary dinner and was something else entirely at this one. Across from her sat Donatella Vischetti, in emerald silk, her smile already sharpened. 2 seats down sat Aldo Ostraco, who had not yet spoken a word since Calla had entered the room. He drank his wine slowly. He did not look at her directly, but once, twice, his eyes flickered to her face and away, like a man trying to convince himself that what he had seen was a trick of the light. The first course was served, a consommé. The conversation around the table was the kind of conversation that powerful people make when they are pretending not to be measuring each other. Markets, a judge's recent ruling, the weather in Capri. Salvatore Renzi, seated at the far end of the table, kept glancing at Rocco with the wide, expectant grin of a man waiting for the punchline of a joke he had helped write. Rocco did not return the look. Donatella waited until the consommé bowls had been cleared. So, she turned her attention to Calla with the deliberate slowness of a hawk choosing a branch. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Donatella Vischetti. And you are?" "Calla Marchetti." "Marchetti." The name was tasted like a wine being assessed. "I don't know that family." "You wouldn't." And what is it you do, Miss Marchetti? Calla took a small sip of water. I am Mr. Veltrano's secretary. The pause around the table was small, almost civilized, but it was there. Donatella's smile did not waver. It deepened. His secretary. She turned the word over in her mouth. How charming. Rocco, darling, what a progressive arrangement. Tell us. Does she also take notes during dinner? A man 2 seats down chuckled. Salvatore grinned openly. Bruno Falcone, sitting beside Donatella, kept his face carefully blank, but his eyes had begun to study Calla with new interest. Rocco opened his mouth to speak. Calla touched the rim of her glass with one finger, the smallest gesture. Rocco closed his mouth. I do take notes occasionally, Calla said. Her voice was even, pleasant. Though usually I find that the people worth listening to do not require their own words written down. The chuckle 2 seats down stopped. Donatella's smile tightened. And the people not worth listening to? Donatella asked. They tend to repeat themselves. Calla lifted her water glass and took a sip. One only needs to hear them once. A silence dropped over their corner of the table. The banker on Calla's left, Guido Pellico, whose face she had memorized from the Veltrano archive, turned his head toward her with the careful attention of a man recalibrating a threat assessment. Forgive me, Miss Marchetti, Donatella said, recovering. I don't mean to be rude. It's simply that the families here share a long history. It's unusual for a stranger to be at this table. I imagine it is. Most people in your position would feel out of place. Most people in my position, Calla said, have not had the privilege of 3 years watching the men at this table conduct business through the doorway of an office where they assumed no one was listening. Bruno Falcone set down his glass. The silence at the principal table now reached the second table behind it. Donatella's smile was no longer a smile. It was a held position. That is an interesting thing to say, she said carefully. It is an honest thing to say. I find honesty saves time at dinners like this. For instance, Mrs. Vichetti, I notice you have been seated to Mr. Veltrano's right at 3 of the last 4 dinners hosted by the families at this table. I notice your husband has not attended any of those 4 dinners. I notice the pattern. And I notice that you came tonight prepared to enjoy seeing the woman Mr. Veltrano arrived with be very, very embarrassed. Calla tilted her head. I imagine that is not how the evening is going to unfold for you. Donatella's hand, holding her wineglass, did not tremble. It was steady in the way that much practiced hands are steady when they have decided to break something. She set the glass down with care. Rocco, she said, without taking her eyes off Calla. Where exactly did you find this one? He didn't find me. Calla's voice was soft. I found him. Down the table, Aldo Ostraco lifted his eyes. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at her. His face was perfectly composed, but Calla could see, because she had watched her father's face for 21 years and learned to read the language of men like these, that Aldo Ostraco was a man who had just understood, with absolute certainty, what was about to happen. He understood, and he did not move. That was the moment Calla knew she had him. A waiter approached the table with the second course. Calla turned her wrist slightly as she lifted her glass, and the cuff of her sleeve fell back, just long enough for the silver pomegranate pin on the underside of her wrist to catch the candlelight. Aldo Ostraco saw it. His wineglass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the porcelain plate. The whole room turned toward him. Aldo, someone said, are you all right? He did not answer. He was looking at Calla, and Calla, very quietly, said, in Italian, across the length of the table, Buonasera, signor Ostraco. È passato molto tempo. Good evening, Mr. Ostraco. It has been a long time. The room did not freeze all at once. It froze in layers. First the principal table. The 12 who had heard her speak in Italian and seen Aldo Ostraco's hand lose its grip on the glass. Then the second table, where conversations died mid-sentence. Then the third. Within 7 seconds, the entire Salon Belcourt had gone still, and 40 pairs of eyes were fixed on a woman in a black dress who, until that morning, had been a name no one in the room had ever heard. Aldo Ostraco rose slowly to his feet. He was a man of 71. He had been the patriarch of the Ostraco family for 38 years. He had not, in any of those years, looked the way he looked now. "Get out," he said. His voice was a whisper that carried. It was not directed at Calla. It was directed at the staff. The waiters stopped where they stood. The sommelier set down the bottle he was holding. "Out," Aldo Ostraco repeated. "All of you, now." The staff filed out without a word. The doors of the salon closed behind them with a soft, final click. 40 of the most powerful people in the country were now sealed in a room with a woman who had just spoken a name none of them had been prepared to hear. Calla rose from her chair. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "My name is Calla Dominici. My father was Massimo Dominici of Milan. Many of you knew him. Some of you broke bread with him. One of you," her eyes did not move from Aldo's face, "ordered him killed 6 years ago this November." Donatella Vaschetti made a small, involuntary sound. "My mother died 8 weeks later. My family's accounts were liquidated. The records were buried. The story given to the press was that my father had taken his own life. He had not. And I have spent every one of the last 6 years preparing for this room." She did not move from behind her chair. She let the silence do the work. "I am not here to make threats. I am not here to ask anything of any of you. Threats and requests are the language of people who need something. I do not need anything from this table. What I came here tonight to do, I have already done." Bruno Falcone's hand had drifted very slowly toward the inside of his jacket. Calla saw it. "Mr. Falcone," she said gently, "please put your hand back on the table." He did not move. "In the past 6 years, I have copied 17 ledgers, 3 private correspondence files, and the entire 2014 archive of the Ostraco shipping concern. I have made arrangements with 3 separate parties in 3 separate jurisdictions. None of them know the others exist. If I do not make a specific phone call from a specific number between 8 and 10 tomorrow morning, those 3 parties will each receive a sealed package. One goes to a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District, one to an investigative magistrate in Milan, the third to a journalist in London. The contents are sufficient to end the careers of every man at the principal table tonight, and to open exhumation orders on 3 buried cases, including my father's." Bruno's hand returned to the table. "I would prefer that phone call remain easy to make," she said. "And so I am asking that no one in this room interfere with my leaving it tonight, or any morning thereafter." Aldo Ostraco had not sat down. His face had aged 10 years in 2 minutes. "What do you want?" he said. It was not a question. "From you, Signor Ostraco." Calla tilted her head. "I want you to understand something. I am not my father. My father was a kind man. He believed in institutions. He believed that if he kept good records and trusted the right people, the truth would protect him. The truth did not protect him. I am protecting the truth. The difference matters." "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow morning you will sign over the Ostraco Shipping Concern's controlling interest into a charitable trust I have already established. The trust will fund 3 things: the Kaleva Foundation in Mercer Hill, in perpetuity; a scholarship at the Conservatorio di Santa Margherita in my father's name; and an independent investigative fund for journalists working on the deaths of bankers and accountants. The papers will be at your office at 9. And if I refuse, you will not refuse. And the others?" He gestured at the table. "The other names in your records? They will remain in my records. Calla said. For as long as every person at this table behaves as though they were never on a list, the moment one of them forgets, the list will remember. That is the only arrangement I am offering. She turned her head, slowly, and looked at every face at the principal table in turn. At Salvatore Renzi, who had bet $50,000 she would cry before dessert. At Bruno Falcone, who had nearly drawn a weapon 30 seconds ago and was now sitting very still. At Donatella Vischetti, whose perfect composure had finally cracked. And then she looked at Rocco Veltrano. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 3 years. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was not surprise. It was recognition. "Mr. Veltrano," she said quietly, "I owe you a private conversation. I will have it with you, if you wish, in your own time. But not tonight." He nodded once. She walked around the table past the silent guests at the second and third tables, across the marble floor, her heels making the only sound in the room. At the doors, she paused and turned back one final time. "My father used to say that the difference between a powerful man and a guilty one is who he is willing to look in the eye over dinner. None of you," she said softly, "looked at me tonight." She opened the door herself. She walked out. And in the silence she left behind, no one in the Salon Belcourt moved for a very long time. She did not sleep. She had not expected to. She returned to her apartment at 10:30. She hung the dress in her closet with the same care she had hung it that morning. She removed the sapphire earrings and laid them in their pouch. She washed her face. She made tea. She sat at her small kitchen table with the tea cooling beside her and waited. The phone call she had described at the table did not need to be made. The 3 packages had been arranged, but they were the second contingency, not the first. The first was simpler. She had only to live through the night. At 1:03 in the morning, there was a knock at her door. Not the buzzer downstairs. The door of her apartment? On the 3rd floor of a building with a controlled lobby. Calla did not move from her chair. The knock came again. 3 soft taps. Then, in a voice she recognized, "It's Rocco. I'm alone." She crossed to the door. She did not open it. She placed her palm flat against the wood, the way her father had once taught her, when she was 11, to feel for the weight of a person on the other side of a door. One person. She unlocked the door. He was wearing the same suit. He looked, for the first time in 3 years, like a man who had not slept in days. He stepped inside without being invited. She closed the door behind him. "I was not followed," he said. "I know. I would have heard them on the stairs." He almost smiled. She did not offer him tea. They both stood in her small kitchen, 2 people who had worked beside each other for 3 years and were meeting, for the first time, in a place where neither of them was wearing a costume. "They will comply," he said. "Aldo will sign in the morning. The others will go home and do nothing. I have spent the last 3 hours making certain of it. Thank you. You did not need my help. I did not need it, but I noticed it." He nodded slowly. "Calla." It was the first time he had used her first name. The sound of it in his mouth was strange to her, soft in a way his voice had never been. "I came here because I owe you a single sentence. I will say it once, and you can decide what to do with it. Go on. For 3 years, you have been the most truthful presence in my life, and I did not know it. I thought truthfulness was a thing one bought, or hired, or threatened. I watched you tonight, and I understood that truthfulness is a thing one carries quietly until the moment it cannot be carried quietly anymore. I have not carried anything quietly in 20 years. I am asking, not for tonight, and perhaps not for a year, whether you might one day allow me to learn how." He stopped. She looked at him. She thought about her father, who had once told her that the only love worth having was the kind that began after both people had seen each other clearly. She thought about how few people, in this world, had ever seen her clearly. "Mr. Veltrano," she said. "Rocco. Rocco." She paused. "I do not know yet whether I can give you that answer. I have been one woman for 6 years. Tonight I became another. I do not yet know who she is going to be. I understand. But," she held his gaze, "I will tell you this. If, in a year, you have done what you said in your office, if you have begun to carry the things you have always carried loudly more quietly, and the things you have always carried quietly more openly, then come back. Knock on this door, and we will see. A year. A year." He nodded. He did not try to touch her. He did not say anything else. He let himself out. She locked the door behind him. Then she walked to her bedroom, and for the first time in 6 years, Cala Domenici slept. The story did not appear in the newspapers. 40 of the most powerful people in the country had been in a room where a young woman had announced she was the daughter of a murdered banker and dictated terms to a patriarch who had not been dictated to in 50 years, and not a single word of it appeared in print. The Ostraco family had its reasons. The Vichettis had theirs. Rocco Veltrano had his. The story was not buried. It was held, the way certain stories are held by people who understand that some pieces of truth are too valuable to spend cheaply. But the world around Cala began, quietly, to change. The Kaleva Foundation reopened 3 weeks after the dinner. They held no ceremony. They unlocked their doors and announced that no child who needed help would be turned away. By the end of the second month, they had hired 4 new teachers. The scholarship at the Conservatorio di Santa Margherita was announced 2 months later. The first recipient was a 14-year-old girl from Naples whose parents could not have afforded a single year's tuition. She was given 5. The award was named for Massimo Domenici, banker and patron of the arts. The girl who received it had never heard the name. That was, in its own way, the point. Cala resigned from the Veltrano company a month after the dinner. She did not give a reason on her resignation letter. Rocco accepted it without comment. On her last day, every member of the staff she had passed unnoticed for 3 years stopped what they were doing as she walked through the lobby for the final time. Octavian, the night security guard, pressed a small paper bag into her hand. Inside was a single fig pastry from the bakery he had told her, once, was the best in the city. She cried in the cab for 2 blocks. Then she stopped. She rented a small studio in the Lindenwall district, 3 streets from her apartment, and furnished it with a music stand, 2 chairs, and a kettle. She put up a sign on the door, Domenici Strings, lessons by appointment. Within 6 weeks, she had 9 students. By the end of the year, 22. One was the granddaughter of a woman named Liesel Hartwig, who came to every recital and never used the word bambina in front of anyone else. In the autumn, Cala gave her first public concert in 6 years. It was a small thing. The chapel on Fenmark Street, the same one where she had once lit candles for nothing. 40 seats. The audience was half her students and half their parents. She played the Bach chaconne, the piece her grandfather had told her not to attempt before she had known a great loss. She had known a great loss. When she finished, no one in the chapel moved for nearly half a minute. Then a small girl in the front row, one of her youngest students, stood up and clapped, and the rest of the audience followed her, and Cala bowed once and walked off the small stage with the violin still warm in her hands. In the back of the chapel, in the last pew, a man in a dark coat sat watching. He did not approach her. He had been coming to her concerts for 6 months, always quietly, always in the back. The year was not up. She had seen him. She always saw him. The year passed. It was on a Thursday evening, 12 months after the dinner at the Aurelian, that he came to her studio door at 6:30 with a small package wrapped in brown paper. She opened the door. She looked at him. He had aged. Not in the way men age badly, but in the way men age when they have begun, finally, to live in the truth of their own faces. He was thinner. His eyes were quieter. I did what I said, he told her. Or I am trying to. I have sold the things I should not have owned. I have given away more than I kept. I am poorer than I was a year ago. I am also more honest than I have ever been. I know, she said. I have been watching. She stepped aside. He came in. He set the package on the small table by the door. What is it? She asked. It belonged to your father. I found it 3 months ago in a sealed file at one of my old offices. I did not open it. It is not mine to open. But I wanted you to have it. She did open it then, very carefully, with hands that did not shake. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook. Her father's handwriting on the first page. A list of names, different from the list she had built her case on. Longer, older, and more dangerous. And tucked into the back, behind the last page, was a small black and white photograph of a child of perhaps 7, holding a quarter-size violin almost as large as she was, smiling with 2 front teeth missing. She held the photograph in both hands. She did not cry. What she felt now was a quieter thing, a sense of a circle closing. Thank you, she said. It is not enough. No, she agreed. It is not. But it is honest. And honest is the only currency I will accept anymore. He stood in her small studio, and she stood across from him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then she said, Sit down, Rocco. I will make tea. He sat down. She made the tea. They talked for the first time, the way 2 people talk when they have stopped pretending to be anyone other than who they are. About small things. About his garden, which he had begun, badly, 4 months ago. About her students. About a piece of music she had been trying to learn and could not yet play to her own satisfaction. He stayed for 2 hours. When he left, she watched him pull on his coat. She watched him pause at the threshold. Calla. Yes. May I come back? She thought about it. Yes, she said. You may. He nodded once. He let himself out. She sat in her studio for a long time after he had gone, with the photograph of the 7-year-old girl on the table, the violin resting on its stand, and the last of the evening light moving slowly across the floor. She had been invisible for 6 years. She was not invisible anymore. She was Calla Domenici, daughter of Massimo, teacher, violinist, a woman who had walked into a room of 40 dangerous people and walked out carrying her father's name back into the open air. She did not know what would happen with the man who had just left her studio. She did not need to know yet. She knew only that she was, finally, awake. And the rest of her life, whatever shape it would take, was going to be lived with her eyes open.